Governing capacity, certainly one of the modifiers of all time. Introduced to replace the state limitations of old EU4, governing capacity is something that is meant to prevent you from being able to full state the world. But there does exist state governing cost, and province governing cost in fairness too from courthouses and town halls, but anyway, state governing cost is a modifier that most certainly exists, and not only is it a modifier from state houses, no, you can also obtain it quite rarely from other sources. So with that I wonder, can you govern the world, full stated, without paying any governing capacity? And indeed, can you do so without also building any town halls, without any consequences, and without indeed any of those state houses in the process of doing it? Well, state governing cost is actually a capped modifier. Remarkably, it is capped at -99% for a 1% minimum governing cost, although flat reductions like the ones present for state houses can reduce it to 0. However, the 99% cap does mean that you will still have to pay a minimum of 1% governing costs for the entire world, and since the world does start with around 21,000 development, assuming no dev clicks are completed by the time you finish conquering the thing, that comes to 210 governing costs. I think that is more than a reasonable enough reduction though, considering that being an empire gives you plus 400 governing capacity, so 210 governing costs should be more than enough for your dreams. Otherwise, standard setup, so no custom nations, Ironman compatible, achievement compatible. I believe that's about it for disclaimers, so we'll just to say real quick, as always, that a like would be appreciated if you haven't already, and a subscription would be amazing. But enough about that, let's get to the counter on the screen, and let's get into the game. Our journey today is going to begin yet again in Hiss and Kaifa. They already made an appearance in the best possible general video, and they're here yet again today. Anyway, Hiss and Kaifa has access to the Ibid Dynasty government reform, which reduces state governing costs by a first 10%. It also does some other stuff, and the government reform is actually locked, meaning you can't get out of it. That's not strictly speaking true, in fact we'll be getting back out of it, but it does mean that we need to get back into it. And what I mean by that is we need to be able to take it again later because we'll be technically losing it. And the reason we're starting as Hiss and Kaifa is because to obtain the Ibid Dynasty government reform, we need to have our primary culture be set to Kurdish, we need our religion to be in the Muslim group, and most crucially we need to either be Hiss and Kaifa or have been Hiss and Kaifa in the past. Meaning that to keep this available for us, we need to make sure that we actually start as Hiss and Kaifa. Anyway, that's going to be our first 10%, and we're going to obtain our next 10% from infrastructure ideas, more specifically administrative efficiency, which is not the same as normal administrative efficiency, but either way is going to reduce our state governing costs by 10% yet again. This is actually going to be about it for our specific idea picks, so anything else in this campaign is up to you. After that, we need to go ahead and obtain the Mandate of Heaven. To do this, we'll need to conquer our way towards China. So for example, let's arrive through here, through Tibet, and change our religion into something that can claim the Mandate of Heaven, for example Vajrayana. This will knock you out of the Ibid tier 1, but don't worry, we'll be grabbing it later. Now, with the Mandate of Heaven CP obtained, we can go ahead and take the mandate, which when we do take the mandate will give us access to the population census decree, which we'll need to basically spam all the time. We need to have 100% uptime on this for 10% state governing cost reduction. We will now be in Celestial Empire, which is a bit annoying because we want to get out of it. It does provide us with 500 governing capacity, of course, however, we need state governing cost. To demonstrate, however, much like our previous tier 1 locked reform that was locked and definitely could not be obtained out of, if we change our religion back to Sunni, we will have access to the Ibid Dynasty government reform. Now, of course, you can't flip into it legitimately because Celestial Empire is a locked government reforms, but let's just say there's quite a few ways around this, so yeah, get out of Celestial government, you don't need to be in it. So, get back to Ibid Dynasty and make sure as you do so, you keep the Mandate of Heaven, as you will need to keep conducting population censuses. If you're doing this in a real game for some reason, this would be also an excellent time to go ahead and grab a colony in the Oceania continent. I like to use this province here, but basically any province in Australia works as long as you don't keep colonizing in Australia outside of that. This will be useful later. Anyway, you need to go ahead now and become temporarily Austrian, which will let you go ahead and form the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And the reason we do this is it's going to give us new traditions and ambitions, which we're going to select, as Austria has access to decentralization, which when we finish the rest of our idea groups, or finish 3 idea groups to be more specific, is going to give us access to state governing cost minus 20%. These ideas are actually not that bad. We have 30% manpower in accepted culture provinces, which is pretty neat, some goods produced modifiers, some artillery cost and artillery common ability, some morale as well as some discipline, and as well as the ability to ignore heretic and heathen provinces. Definitely nothing to complain about here. And while frankly not as strong as Hungary or even Austria, it's certainly an underutilized tag in my opinion. With that said, we no longer need to be Austrian, so we can become Kurdish yet again. So there we go, can become Ibid Dynasty, or the Austrian Archduchy, or the Celestial Empire. There are a lot of options. Anyway, we will need to stick with this, but before we do, we need to very quickly go ahead and form the Mughal Empire. And now you may be wondering, wait a minute, we're Austria-Hungary, we can't form anything, surely Austria-Hungary is an NTAG. And indeed, despite the fact that Austria-Hungary requires Admin-Tech 18 to form, or a specific Austrian mission, it's not an NTAG. And it's also forbidden from forming Germany. I don't know who you're meant to form after Austria-Hungary. In fact, you can actually form Germany after forming Austria-Hungary. If you form Austria-Hungary, then form something else. For example, Poland, after which you can go ahead and form Germany. Anyway, no further questions here, we're going to go ahead and form the Mughal Empire. Now, obviously you want to make sure you keep Austro-Hungarian ideas for that 20% state governing cost. And you will also need to make sure your primary culture actually does remain Kurdish, so you have access to the Ayub dynasty government reform. As indeed we would want to flip back into it as our tier 1. As you can see, it is also compatible with the Mughal Divan. Anyway, the reason we're in the Mughals is obviously for their missions, more specifically this mission here, which is going to give us access to an estate privilege for our Mansabadas, or nobility, giving us minus 15% state governing cost and the cost of plus 5 province war score cost, which is annoying, but it's minus 15% state governing cost, so absolutely crucial for us. Now you may be wondering, why did we colonize that province in the middle of the Pacific earlier? Well, what that's going to do is it's going to let us state the thing, and once we've done that, we can go ahead and move our capital here. Now, what's interesting with moving our capital here is that we can move it here. It's not a colonial region. However, it is located on the continent of, well, Asia. If you hover over the subcontinents, you can see it's in Oceania. Sorry, not in Asia, it's in Oceania. Now, the reason this is crucial because it's not in Asia is because this should be our only province in Oceania. Don't colonize Australia, should be not that difficult of a task. Most people tend to avoid that anyway. Once you have your capital here, you're able to go ahead and colonize a province in the New World. And this is something we want to do, more specifically colonize this province, as because we will only have one province in our entire country stated inside our continent, we're able to go ahead and move our capital to the New World, which is something we will go ahead and do. And obviously this is going to unlock the conditions for the White House, which when built is going to reduce our state governing cost by 25%. Meaning that we'll have our Hiss and Kaifan legacy with the White House built while we are having the Mandate of Heaven as the Mughals, who are, you know, obviously Sunni or any other Muslim religion you're able to go share if you want to. And yeah, I mean, it's quite the cursed run, and all of those things all combine for minus 90% state governing cost. And unfortunately, that's actually the limit. It can't really go beyond that, which is a shame. There are 2 other sources in the game that we could get, but we can't really without changing our initial setup. So unfortunately, NTAGs exist, which does mean that we do not have access to Castile, or more specifically Spain, as inside of their mission, law and order available here, we're able to get minus 5% state governing cost until the end of the game as a province modifier on Granada. Now, unfortunately, the way that this province modifier works is that if anyone else conquers this province, we no longer have access to the state governing cost reduction on it. This is a province modifier that is available to Spain, but is lost if Spain ever loses access to Granada. So that's a shame. There's no way of setting up the AI to pump this mission for us and then take it from them. Otherwise, I would have told you to do it. As well as Italy, which has estate nobles, ITA military governors, as a nobility estate privilege they have access to. Now, where or how they actually get access to this, I cannot know. I checked their entire mission tree, and I seem to not have found this. This also does not exist on the Wikipedia, which shouldn't be a surprise to people at this point, but basically, I don't know how you get this, which is a bit of a weird one, but it does promise to give you 0.05% state governing cost, or minus 5% again. You can technically also just have access to this government reform if you are Rome, because the conditions for it is that either you have the country flag Italy enable this, or your tag is Rome, or you were the tag Rome at one point, so you formed Rome and then stopped being Rome, which should be impossible, but I guess they put that in there for fun. Thank you, Paradox, very cool. I again have failed to find a way of actually locating the original estate nobility ITA military governors point, but anyway, this technically exists. There's also minus 10% state governing cost, albeit just for 25 years for France here, which is weird because it lets you go under GovCap for 25 years. It's a bit of a weird modifier, but either way, it's nice. Now, while original run is rather painful and only reduces it by 90%, meaning that, shock and horror, you will have to use courthouses for minus 25% everywhere else for the province governing cost, or just accept the fact that technology, base high and government rank will give you access to over 2,000 governing capacity, or more specifically 2,100 governing capacity, which will be enough to rule the world at a 90% state governing reduction. But anyway, this is all hypotheticals. Let's say we allow ourselves the use of town halls, so the upgraded courthouse for minus 50% governing cost, and we build inefficient state houses everywhere, which gives a further 20% statewide governing cost reduction, meaning we start with minus 70%. Can we get that to minus 100? And the answer is, yeah, actually remarkably easy. build town halls and state houses inefficiently in every single province you have access to for the minus 70% reduction as mentioned previously, and combine that with Austro-Hungarian ideas that have minus 20% state governing cost, and of course grab infrastructure ideas for administrative efficiency for the final 10% state governing cost, and enjoy a 100% reduction everywhere where you've built this combination, letting you full state to the world without issue. With that said, that is all the time I have for you today. If you again have any specific modifier stacking videos that you think are worthy of a remaster, do be sure to let me know down below. But indeed, thank you very much for watching, with a special thank you to all my channel members, especially Ark, Soda, W Haste, Selemon, Sars22, Lord Zendikar, Nick Fassbender, Nanhatan, Nick Huss, The Awesome Rabbit, Best Pro Gaming, Grandma Flavia, Sob, Mobkiller, Anthony35, AC Napo, Glorious Leader, Frankie, Yukata, Danray, Private Claw, Jack, Malvi, Conspiracy Pizza, and Liberaloo.